in bar number 126353.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madeline Loeb, spelled L-O-E-B, bar number 173970.
All right, Ms. Weinmiller?
Good morning, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller appearing with Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is W-I-N-E-M-I-L-L-E-R, and my bar number is 863177.
Good morning, Your Honor. Lisa Maxfield also appearing with Ms. Brophy. My bar number is 844337, and my last name is spelled M-A-X-F-I-E-L-D.
All right, and before we bring the jury in, I did receive this morning a motion to compel disclosure of images displayed to the jury during the state's opening statement. And I received a couple of slides that the state used in opening statement. I guess my first question to defense is this a motion that you want to take up now?
Your Honor, it isn't. We received the same email just now. We haven't reviewed it, but I think they also gave us a flash drive with the entire presentation, slide presentation. So we'll look at that, but let's consider that moot unless we re-raise it, if you will.
So I'm sorry, say one more time.
I said unless we re-raise it, you can consider that moot. I think that they have given it to us. We have not reviewed the flash drive, but I think that we're going to be in good position now.
So the motion is not, we're not taking up the motion right now.
No, and I should have phrased this differently. Why don't I affirmatively represent to the court when it is in fact moot and satisfied? I'll review the drive and then.
So for now, we're doing nothing with the motion and we'll see whether or not it's an issue.
Yes, and I think it's resolved, yes.
Okay, understood. All right then, anything else before we bring in the jury?
Yes, Your Honor. We just want to put it before the court that when they call, I cannot remember his first name, I'm sorry, Mr. Rubinson, as a witness, we intend to request a 104 hearing before his testimony.
Okay. And is this related to what we were talking about yesterday?
So specifically with Mr. Rubinson, all we have been provided is a CV and a one-page Word document with some numbers on it. There's no context, no explanation. We don't actually know what his expertise is. His CV sort of suggests that he has a couple of different areas of expertise, so we don't really know what the context or the basis of his knowledge would be to be able to testify as an expert in whatever issue they're planning on calling him for, which is what we don't know.
And is he the defense next witness after Ms. Cooch?
He is, Your Honor.
And although we can certainly have a 104 hearing, does defense wish to speak to Mr. Rubinson's testimony at this point?
We do, Your Honor. It's Dr. Rubinson, actually. He has a PhD in economics. He's an emeritus professor of economics. The state does know that. We have indicated that is why we are calling him to present an analysis of economic loss. This would be the first time he's testified in a criminal case, but he testifies routinely and has in the state for 30 years now, presenting analyses of economic loss and other testimony about economic damages. As the court's well aware, that typically comes up in the context of either an injury case or a death case, wrongful death, civil matter, but the same analysis applies in the criminal context. So there's nothing unusual about that testimony, and he certainly is well qualified as an expert.
When you say analysis of economic loss, I'm not sure I'm totally following.
Well, in order to put the insurance in context, we've had testimony about what people should try to achieve in terms of what the actual death benefit would be and what a guide would be for how much insurance is affordable. But the other side of that coin is what was her loss when Mr. Brophy died? What loss is she trying to compensate for with that insurance? What would that insurance be meeting? And so what he would present is exactly the same type of testimony that he would present if Mr. Brophy had been killed by a driver who was texting and ran into him. And there was a suit in which she was seeking damages to compensate for that, just the economic loss. Obviously, the loss of companionship and all of those things that go with a marriage are outside the economic analysis, but this would just be the pecuniary loss, both from wages that he did not bring into the household as a result of his demise, or from things that he was unable to contribute, such as all of the you know, all of the wonderful things that he contributed in the home environment in their marriage.
All right, but to be clear, he would be called for the economic
Right,
issue, not for the intangibles.
exactly. And so the state has been provided with this summary. He would testify about how this summary is achieved, and I think that testimony would be very familiar to anybody who's heard testimony about economic damages and other cases in this courthouse.
Okay. With that explanation, does the state still want a 104 hearing?
Yes, Your Honor, because we have no idea, as you can see on this one page that's been provided, we have no idea what he relied on or what he used to get to these numbers. And part of the problem is, you know, suggesting that we know what he's being called for. I mean, his CV literally has on here under professional activities that he's part of the Creativity Research Center of Southern California, member of the board of directors for the Institute of Creative Intelligence. And there's been obviously some offerings in this case from defense that would suggest that they might be calling him for some sort of creative testimony about, and so we just haven't been provided any information, so we have no idea. In this one page that just says loss of pecuniary support from what, for who, how is that, what is that based on? I think he needs to testify in a 104 hearing as to what these are based on, so we can determine whether or not we're going to challenge him as an expert witness in this area, and or we need to have our own experts be able to observe his testimony.
Well, I mean, as to the latter part, I mean, your experts can watch his testimony. I'm not sure what the 104 hearing does for that.
So we know which expert to talk to.
I see. Okay, so let me just repeat back what I think I'm hearing. The state at this point would potentially challenge his ability as an expert to derive at these ultimate numbers. Therefore, the state's asking for a 104 hearing to have a better understanding of what these numbers are based upon.
Yeah, the basis of his knowledge.
All right. And so they're not objecting yet. They're asking for a 104 hearing. What did you want to say, Ms. Weinmiller?
Well, Your Honor, I just don't think it's that complicated. I think we have indicated that he would be testifying to present a summary and analysis of economic loss. Certainly if they had consulted any economist, they would have known exactly what that meant immediately. They know that he's an economist. They have that CV. If they're not prepared, they can get a transcript of his testimony and address it later, but that's not a reason not to proceed now.
All right, so here's what I want to do. As far as his background, I can accept the curriculum vitae for his past experience, training, degrees, etc. For the 104 hearing, as I understand it, the issue is really that there's these three large numbers with no indication as to what they're based on. So the point of the 104 hearing that I will allow would be simply to establish what these numbers are based on. You know, I mean, for example, is this based over 2 years of loss, 10 years of loss based on his life expectancy? I don't know either, just looking at this. So that would be, in my mind, the point of the 104 hearing. I don't hear that the state is challenging what his background is. Okay. All right. But in any event, we're still with Ms. Cooch for the time being. We're still on direct of Ms. Cooch. So why not, is she in the courtroom?
She is, Your Honor, and
All
it's
right.
couch.
Oh,
I know here in
it's,
Portland we
we-
say cooch, but it's couch.
I thought she said Cooch yesterday. No, okay, Ms.
We've
Couch.
been saying Cooch.
All right, I apologize, Ms. Couch. You can retake the witness stand. And just as a reminder, you did take an oath. You took an oath yesterday, so you were still under that oath. Why don't you come up and get seated, though? And we'll bring the jury back in.
Okay, Judge, we'll go off record and mute on WebEx, and I will go ahead and get the jury.
All right, please be seated. And when we left yesterday, we were in the direct testimony of Ms. Couch, so we'll continue.
Thank you, Your
Defense.
Honor. Ms. Couch, when we left off yesterday, we were about to explore the mysteries of net worth. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you tell us again what net worth is?
So again, net worth is the difference between an individual or couple's total assets. So assets being cash, the value of a home, a furniture, cars, all of the stuff and the things, and then minus any debts on those things. So mortgages, consumer credit card debt, those are the typical kinds of things that you might reduce from an asset worth in order to get the net worth, positive or negative.
Okay, and why is net worth important?
It's just important to understand the overall financial health of of a family, in this case, the Brophies.
Okay, and in addition to generally understanding the Brophy's income and expenses, did you look at their overall financial picture, their net worth?
I did.
Let me show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 284. Counsel?
Yep.
And ask if you can identify that.
Yes, this is the calculation I made.
Okay. Defense author, Defendant's Exhibit.
No objection.
Mr. Breton, would you- oh. Based on all the documents, let me ask you this. If the Brophy's had been able to sell their house for more than, well, let's look at this. Before I start asking questions, let's look at this. And can you
Sure.
tell us what we're seeing?
Sure, I'm gonna stand up and,
Sure.
yeah. So, okay, so on the left, we have assets. So I've listed the cash, that's that same cash balance we've been talking about. I've done the net worth calculation as of June 1st, 2018. So that's that $11,711.52 that we know is in the Brophy's bank account on June 1st, 2018. I've then taken Mr. Brophy's 401k balance of $79,021. I've added in the fair market value of the home. I conservatively used that based on some documents that were provided to me. That was the estimated worth at that time. I was very conservative in that number. And when I say conservative, meaning, I didn't include all the values that I, potentially could have on that home. I've just estimated the vehicles that they owned and then just estimated the household items, furniture, jewelry, just, I think they had some nice pots and pans and the collector kind of things. So all of those items combined total to $680,000 of total assets that they, I estimate that they had on June 1st, 2018. I did not use the value of the life insurance policies that they had at the time. For example, I believe some of those values had some cash value. Normally you'd put that in a calculation like this. I did not. So 680,000 is the total conservative total asset number that I calculated. I then had to reduce by their known debts or liabilities at that time. So that's what you're going to see on the right-hand side. The credit cards, which are that Sears card and the Bank of America card, that's the first number you see. They had the home equity line of credit. That number was provided to me as the estimated payoff right around that period of time in 2018. That's that Citibank mortgage we talked about yesterday. I then have the loan on Mr. Brophy's 401k. So we know he had a loan. So, this 79,000 minus the 30 gets us to about that $48,000 that we know was the value of the 401k when it was dispersed about a month later. And then the home mortgage balance on that date, straight from the Wells Fargo statement right at that time. So at June 1st, 2018, I estimated that they had $301,000 of total liabilities, So when you subtract $301,000 of liabilities from $680,733 of total assets, you're going to come up with an estimated net worth of $378,987. So in other words, if they sold all of their stuff and all of their things and reduced and paid off all of their debts, ostensibly that's the amount of cash they would have had in the bank on June 1st, 2018.
So that would be their net worth.
That's their net worth.
And if the Brophy's been able to sell their house for more than the number that you've listed there, $565,000, would their net worth have been higher?
Correct. So if you increase the numbers on the left column, so for example, if that home had sold for more, then their estimated net worth would have been a higher figure.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, if they had cashed out their house and the other items, they would have had sufficient funds to pay off all their debt, get rid of 2 mortgages, and still had about $300,000 in the bank?
Correct.
Council says it's almost 400,000.
Well, the estimated worth is 400,000, but if they'd kept all their things and, just taken out the house only, right, sold that house, as was my understanding was the plan, but they would have still had their furnishings, they would have still had their vehicles. If they'd taken that 565,000 and paid off the $9,300 line of credit and the $255,000 mortgage, just selling the house alone would have put an additional $300,000 in the bank.
Okay. Do people who are financially strapped or about to, quote, fall off a financial cliff usually have a positive net worth?
No, not typically.
What do you typically see when someone's on a financial cliff?
So typically what I see is that they're not able to they're regularly missing their regular debt payments. Their debt payments are, in other words, their debt payments, their mortgage, their credit card debt, their utilities, those things that they have to pay, those things are typically in excess of the funds they are bringing in. And so what I typically see when people are falling off a financial cliff and aren't doing anything to stop it, they will usually first use credit card debt to fill in the gap, right? They'll use that to go grocery shopping. They'll use that to go to Fred Meyer or Target and buy supplies or just stuff and things. I will often see them spending money unnecessarily on consumer goods. So that's what I typically see. And what you would typically notice is that if I did a calculation like this, it would be negative, meaning their liabilities would be in excess of the cash and assets they had available to relieve those debts.
And is this indicative of what you saw of the Brophy household?
No, it's the opposite of what I saw in the Brophy household.
In your experience as a financial expert, do you find that people or businesses buy life insurance for retirement planning or financial planning?
Yes,
And
it's a vehicle for retirement planning.
okay, and so in your experience, why do people buy life insurance? What are the purposes?
So typically when people buy life insurance, it's to first replace the income of the person that might die. So spouses will often buy life insurance on one another because if one of them dies, then you're going to lose the value of their income coming in. Businesses will often do this as well for a high-paid CEO or that person that's bringing in the money for the business. They'll buy life insurance in case that person dies. They will also buy it in order to relieve the debts that they have. So for example, if a spouse dies and I want to stay in my home, I probably am going to want to have enough insurance so that I can pay off that mortgage in the event of the spouse's death. So that's a second reason why somebody or why families will buy insurance. And the third can be for annuity purposes. So what that means is there's cash value. So even though you're paying those premiums every month, there's an opportunity in some of those insurance plans to get money back back for different kinds of reasons. For example, maybe a long-term care, somebody gets old and has to go into a home and we need to cover those expenses. So they are very much, or can very much be a buffer for retirement purposes.
So I think what you're describing is that there's a death benefit that would help cover debts, but that there are other advantages to having a life insurance policy that would accrue while the person's still living. Is that right?
Correct. So there are benefits that can accrue while the person's still living, and premiums can be returned, or there can be annuity pieces of the policy or long-term care pieces of the policy. They are all very different.
Did you examine what Nancy Brophy's financial outcome would be in the event that Dan Brophy died, and how the life insurance would contribute to that?
I did.
Let me show you, it's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 285. And ask you to identify that.
So this is the analysis of the insurance policies and the estimated debt payoffs and replacement of Mr. Brophy's income.
No objection.
All right, it's admitted.
I have my glasses off, Mr. Breton, is it up there? Can you walk us through Exhibit 285?
Sure. So in the first box on Exhibit 285 is just a list of all the policies that I identified with the benefits that were potentially available on Mr. Brophy's life. And that number was $809,774. And there were 6 policies.
Okay.
And I attempted to figure out the dates that they had been started
Okay.
or written.
What's the second box?
So then the second box assumes that Ms. Brophy would need to replace Mr. Brophy's income for 10 years. So my estimate is that she was going to pay off the debts and then replace his income for 10 years. How much money would she need? This is a very simple calculation. It assumes dollars as of that day. It doesn't assume he'd ever get a raise. It doesn't assume inflation or things like that. So I'm paying off the mortgage, or the 2 mortgages and the debts, and assuming that she's going to replace his income at $45,000 per year for 10 years. So in that 10-year period of time, that estimates a cash need of $722,500.
And what about the third box?
The third box just estimates a 15-year lifespan or 15-year need to replace Mr. Brophy's income. And so that all the other numbers remain the same except the last one, which takes the 45,000 times 15 years and estimates a need of 675,000. So all of those numbers combined indicates a financial need of $947,500.
So some of these policies were purchased several years before Mr. Brophy's death, is that right?
Yes.
So as a consumer was trying to determine how much insurance they need, they would look at the life expectancy of the person that they're insuring in that year, is that right?
Well, typically the insurance companies will do that. They will look at the life expectancy. Usually the parties who are getting the insurance will say, okay, well, how long am I going to need to live on a certain income if you're gone? My spouse and I have had the same kind of conversations. If he died versus I died, what kind of amount of money might we need to pay off the debts and live in whatever lifestyle we decide we think we might want at that time in our life. And then how long that would last until you had either had other means or you yourself were expected to die.
Is it crazy to be optimistic and assume that we're going to live to be 90 or 100?
Not these days, a lot more people are living a lot longer. And so, no, not at all. And especially, as you get older and you're unable to live on your own and you have to go into a assisted living facility, those costs become almost untenable.
Did you find that the Brophies were overinsured?
In my professional opinion, based on what I heard from the other insurance folks in terms of the revenue, their cost of life insurance or all insurance as compared to their income, based on my very rudimentary, very simple calculation, it appeared that the policies on Mr. Brophy's life were reasonable based on a reasonable need.
Does your analysis take into account the increased cost of living over the subsequent 10 years?
No, so I did not assume an increased cost of living. So as we all know, that today, going to the grocery store today is a lot different than if we'd gone to the grocery store in 2018. And so those costs have all increased. Gas has increased. All of those things mean that our dollar goes a lot, it doesn't go as far. And so I have not taken those kinds of increases into account in this. And had I done so, the need would be greater.
Okay. Does your analysis take into account the cost of long-term care should something catastrophic happen to Nancy Brophy?
No.
If you took those two things into account, a major illness, the increased cost of living, what would you expect to happen to your charts?
There'd be a very significant increase in the amount of estimated life insurance needed if I were to have included those kinds of calculations.
So they might have needed even more insurance.
Correct.
Lastly, Ms. Couch, all things being equal, did you make any assumptions about the Brophy's financial picture had Dan Brophy remained alive?
I did.
Why'd you do that?
Well, the prosecution is trying to say they were on a financial cliff, that they were about to run out of money. So I wanted to figure out if they were going to run out of money and how soon they would have run out of money had they spent the same amount of money that they had been spending. So I made a calculation to figure that out.
Let me show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 286. Yep. What's that?
So this is a calculation that shows, I just basically did a prospective financial analysis from June of 2018 through December of 2018, assumed their level of income, assumed their highest level of spending, and figured out, how much money they would have left at the end of the month and then at the end of that year.
No objection.
All right, 286 is admitted.
Walk us through this and let us know which parts of this exhibit are most important for the jury to see.
Sure. I'm going to stand up again. I think it's easier. So I take a total income of $9,900. As we know from exhibit, I think it was 278, but the exhibit where we talked about yesterday how much income they had, that number was a little higher. It was like 9971. And we know that Mr. Brophy had, was deferring some of his income to his 401k. So I just rounded that down to $9,900, and I assumed that they would bring $9,900 into their bank accounts from June 2018 all the way through December of 2018. So this just is in that year that Mr. Brophy died. I then reduced that income by the amount of payments that they were making or I believed that they would make. So for example, on the mortgage, I assumed that $1,700 mortgage that we know had just been bumped up in the few months before Mr. Brophy died. And then I added that $500 Citibank second mortgage because remember, they had been paying $57 a month, but they started paying $500 a month. So I've added that to the mortgage. So I've got that mortgage being at an accelerated rate of $2,300 a month. I've got the insurance based on the actual insurance policies at the time. That's $1,970 a month. Credit card, we know they were paying $1,000 a month. They were not really using that. So I actually have that being paid off by, oops, sorry. I think I touched that and it moved, but I have that being paid off by the end of November. Can we get rid of that box? Sorry.
Can we get in, which box is it, Ms. Couch?
Sorry. We don't need a box. So the third line is credit card payment. And we could see that I have a 0 in December because I've assumed that the credit cards would have been paid off by the end of November. And then I go on down the line. I've got a really high number for household, like $1,250 a month. Their average was actually a lot less than that. But some of their expenses that they were doing from January to May 2018 were a little higher. So I used the higher number because the higher the number, I knew, the more expenses they're going to have. So I show that, I've assumed that they're going to be paying $10,683 a month out of their bank account from June to November of 2018. And then because they pay that credit card off, $9,800 a month in December. So that is more than their income. We know that. $9,900 minus $10,862 is actually a deficit of $962.90. So then I assume, okay, well, here's how much money's in the bank. When you take $962 out of their $11,711, you get to $10,748. Then we go into the new month, we do it again, and we are reducing their bank balances every single month because remember, they're in a deficit until December. So that by the end of the year, they would have still had $5,971 left if they had been spending at those high levels or even higher than they actually were because I've used higher numbers than necessary in order to figure out if they would run out of money. And in my professional opinion, they would not have run out of money by the end of December of 2018.
So it certainly doesn't run out in the same month that Dan Brophy dies.
They would not have run out of money in the same month that Dan Brophy died.
And it doesn't even run out in the same year that Dan Brophy dies.
It would not.
Would it run out in the second year after Dan Brophy dies?
In my professional opinion, it wouldn't because remember, they're paying off those debts. So as you pay off debts, guess what happens? You have more cash coming into your house. And so now you're going to flip that to the positive and you're not going to need to draw down on your savings.
So in other words, if they continue the plan that they demonstrated they've employed up to this time, their financial picture just gets better and better. Is that right?
That's correct.
Had the Brophies sold their home or the lot next to their house, would you have expected them to run out of money?
They would not have run out of money had they sold the lot or sold the home or both.
You primarily examined the income and expenses of the Brophies from 2016 to 2018, is that right?
That's correct.
And you were able to determine that their income went up in 2017 and then up again in 2018,
Correct.
Is that right? Did you also have a chance to look back in time to like 1999, the year that they bought their home?
Yes.
And how does that compare to what you're seeing in the later years?
So I have a tax return from 1999. Ms. Brophy, it looked like she had a catering business. It was making about $500,000 a year. They had a lot more income back then when they bought their house than they did later in life. But they were making efforts to actually make more money in later years than they had, for example, in 2016.
Okay. Yesterday, I kind of zipped through a couple of exhibits, and I want, just before we end today, to go back to those to make sure we understand kind of the bottom line of your analysis. Is that okay?
Okay.
Let's look first at Exhibit 271. Can you explain to the jury again, maybe more slowly than I rushed you through it yesterday, what the bottom line of Exhibit 271 is?
So the bottom line of 271 is just to show you how better off they were in the day before Mr. Brophy died than they were in the 2 years prior. So in the 2 years prior, in all 8 of those bank accounts, they had $338. On the day before Mr. Brophy died, they had $11,711. If we kind of scroll up, thank you. They had, quite a bit of consumer debt, especially as compared, for example, to the amount of money in the bank. And that changed substantially. That had gone down substantially by June of 2018, down to about 61.73 and 46 cents. So this exhibit is important to understand how many bank accounts did they have? How did those change over time? How did their debt change over time? What increased the bank accounts and what decreased the debt?
And do you remember which exhibit it was that broke out the Wells Fargo payments?
Give me a minute. 276.
Could you pull up 276, Mr. Breton? Oh, it's tiny again. Tell us what
It's
we're
really
seeing.
tiny. But what I wanted to point out was, yes, in 2016, they missed some payments. In 2017, they missed payments. And up over here on the right, I'm figuring out the number of payments past due. But beginning in October, they make all 4 of those payments up, and they don't miss another payment for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months. So in my professional opinion, again, they're working their plan. We have a trend of making that mortgage payment every single month. And so I just thought it was important to show that trend of missed payments had apparently reversed at the time that Mr. Brophy died.
Okay, and do you remember which, I'm sorry to do this to you, but do you remember which exhibit laid out the Citibank analysis that you talked about yesterday?
I believe that's 277.
277?
And 277 is just another example of showing the plan, because we can see that $57 payment every single month being paid without fail, but then increasing in those months before Mr. Brophy died, again, indicating a plan to accelerate the payoff of that debt.
And then if we revert back to what we were just talking about, ultimately, the Brophy's net worth was a positive net worth. I said 300,000, she thought it was closer to 400,000.
Well, the net worth was $378,000. Again, conservative number, that's Exhibit 284. So $378,000 is their net worth. So again, that assumes they literally sell everything: their cars, their furniture, their pots and pans, their jewelry, their house, and everything. That net worth comes to $378,000. But if they had only just sold the house, they probably would have netted right around that $300,000 number conservatively. And that's how much they would have put in their bank account had they been able to work that plan.
Let's talk about the bottom line. Did you see anything in your analysis to suggest that in the between November of 2017 and June 1st of 2018 that the Brophies were in financial distress or on the cusp of financial distress?
I did not.
Did it appear to you that they were financially healthy by this point?
They had absolutely turned around their financial health. They were working their plan. They had a positive net worth. They had sufficient income to cover their debts. They were paying those debts at an accelerated level. And in my professional opinion, were financially healthy on the day that Mr. Brophy passed away.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Couch. Just to start off, are you being paid to be here yesterday and today?
I am.
And how much are you being paid?
The rate is $225 an hour.
And what percentage of your work is as a paid expert?
All of my clients have to pay me for my time. That's how I earn my revenue.
Sure, but as an expert for testifying, how much of your source of income is being paid as an expert specifically?
Oh gosh, so in terms of dollars, I don't know, but in terms of cases, I've probably worked about 1,000 cases, and I've testified less than 100 times. So you're at about 10% of the cases that I'm hired for go to trial, and I have to testify as the expert.
But you're also being paid as an expert to do the review and all of that, correct?
I do all the work myself with my staff, but the high-level stuff I do.
Okay. In this particular case, what documents were you given to review?
Sure. So I had the 8 bank accounts. I had those bank statements from approximately May of 2016 through September-ish of 2018. I had the Brophy's tax returns. I can't remember all of the tax returns I had. I have a list. I'm happy to go find it. I'm just kind of talking off the top of what I remember. I had the Bank of America credit card statements. I had information on Mr. Brophy's W-2s. I had Mr. Brophy's information on his 401k in terms of, number one, the loan that he took out, the promissory note on that loan, the balance on the date that Ms. Brophy had was paid out the amount. I had, let's see, I had all the insurance policies, so I reviewed all of those. And that's what in terms of financial documents, I think I said tax returns, so that's what I can remember off the top of my head.
And were you provided with other documents or information about the case?
I had information, for example, when the state's expert testified, I reviewed the trial testimony, what they call transcripts, so the written transcripts of those days and some of the exhibits that those folks had, so I did review that as well.
Nothing else about the facts of the case or plans or things like that?
Plans.
Well, you refer a lot to the plan. What information did you have about the plan?
Well, one of the questions I asked the lawyers, Ms. Weinmiller and Ms. Maxfield, is whether they did, because I could see I could see that change, right? I could see accelerated debt payments. I could see what was going on. So I asked, I had, information from the lawyers and discussions. Can you ask Ms. Brophy what was going on at the time? Because I do see a change in what was going on. So that information primarily came from the lawyers.
Okay, and from Ms. Brophy, your assumption, it sounds like, is that it came from them talking to Ms. Brophy or information from Ms. Brophy.
That's my assumption, yes.
I'm gonna need some of the exhibits. Are you ready? All right. I want to go through some of these exhibits with you. I want to start with exhibit 271.
Yep.
We'll put them up here for you. All right. And so you start this first, I'll call the first box and the second box for clarity. This first box starts on May 31st of 2016. Why that date?
It was a month end.
It
was the earliest month I had. It was a month end.
Okay. And with using that start date, you have a bank account balance of $338.45 for this, for all of the total of these bank balances. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And are you aware that 6 days later, the Brophy's then had an additional $3,500 that they took out in a loan?
Potentially. Those balances literally changed every day. So those were the earliest month of statements that I had.
Okay, but you picked the end of the month of May.
Because it's a statement. That's when the statements print.
Okay. But looking 6 days later, that would substantially change then that next number, the increase, decrease amount, if they had an additional $3,500, would it not? Just in simple math.
Well, let me look. So they had, it looks like they got a $3,500 deposit, then they paid a mortgage payment. So on that same day, it went from $277. It added $3,500 in income. They paid their mortgage and they were back down to $546.
Okay, but it would, fair to say, depending on the day, it would change this chart.
For one day, it changed it for one day. Yes, correct.
Sure, but as you just said, it changed constantly. So if we picked a different day and time, it may have drastically changed those numbers.
It would not drastically change those numbers in 2016.
Okay. All right. And you keep referring to 8 accounts. You looked at 8 bank accounts, and that being a difference from what other people have testified to. Can you explain what you mean by those 8 accounts? What 8 bank accounts are you talking about?
The ones listed here, they're all different account numbers.
But in fact, the first 4 on-point accounts are actually all the same account. Isn't that correct?
It's like if you guys bank at a credit union, for example, I bank at a credit union. Most credit unions, if you open different accounts within the credit union, they keep your member number. Usually those first 4 numbers are your member number or something attributable to your member numbers. And then they'll have a -1, -3, -5, -7. And so that -1 might be your checking account. That -3 might be your savings account. The -5 might be your money market account. The -7 might be your car loan account. So that's how credit unions do their accounts. If we were at Bank of America, for example, Bank of America would give you 4 separate accounts. So these are 4 separate accounts at the credit union.
Okay, but they're all sort of linked. Those first 4 are linked together. They're all that same joint account with separate accounts that they delineated. And then those next 2 are the same joint Estrada Brophy agency account, but linked different accounts within that.
Correct. So as you open a new account at your credit union, they're going to basically give you a whatever and add it to that member account.
And you referred a lot to looking at these 8 accounts, referring back to the 8 bank accounts. But if we look at this chart that you've provided, 4 of these accounts don't really change at all over the entire period that you're looking at. Isn't that right?
2 didn't change. The -8 and the -1, those are those, again, credit unions, they'll usually make you have $5 in a savings account. So it doesn't look like the Brophies actually use that very much. But all of the others did have transactions in them throughout the 2 years.
Yeah, looking at the -1 and then at the -22 of the Brophy Estrada account, although those change, they change in an amount less than roughly $150 total.
Over time, I would agree with that.
Okay. So would it be fair to say, in looking at this, that it's really 4 main accounts that have the majority of the activity?
I can't recall in terms of the -22 because even though I would need to, I'm happy to answer that question, but I can't agree with you here on that because I know, for example, -3 is being used, -9 is being used, 7650 and that Odonta account, but that BE agency account was being used pretty significantly at the beginning. So even though the balance overall didn't change, I don't agree with you that there weren't transactions that were, important to understand and notice the transfers of funds going between the accounts.
Sure. And would it be fair to say that you're looking at, and part of what you testified to is you're looking at and noticing transactions in all of these accounts, but that there are certain accounts that you focused more on, as we can see by the exhibits you prepared, because they had more activity or more significant activity?
No, because they all work together. So you had to look at all of them in order, all of these are all, nothing's focused. Everything's focused on the whole picture and every single transaction. Everything feeds into the rest of the exhibits.
But you didn't provide specific exhibits in detail for all of these accounts. You only provided them for Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the main on-point accounts.
No, that's not correct. If we go to exhibit 272, you literally have every transaction in all 8 bank accounts in exhibit 272. It's combined. And the reason I combine them is so that I can identify transfers between accounts. It's so that I can identify bank balances on any given day. But I actually have a spreadsheet for each of the 8 bank accounts, each of the credit card accounts, the Wells Fargo. I have a separate spreadsheet for each one, but 272 combines them all. So I don't agree with you. I actually have every transaction in all 8 bank accounts in 272.
Okay, but then you delineate the following set of exhibits are specific accounts you looked more closely at.
No, ma'am, that's not correct.
What are those following exhibits then?
Okay, so if we go to 273,
Well, I'm just asking in summary, what would you say the rest of the exhibits are? Are they not specific focused things that you're asked to look at or that you're looking at per
Sure.
account?
So 273 is all 8 bank accounts, just as sources and uses of funds.
Sure, it's a different summary of 272.
It's a summary of 272. That's correct.
Right. But when we get to the specific exhibits that look at, for example, you have specific looking at the Bank of America credit card details. You have an exhibit looking at the Wells Fargo mortgage. You have an exhibit talking about the city mortgage.
Mhm.
You have some charts looking at the bank balances for totals, but then specifically for Bank of America, those types of things. You didn't do specific exhibits for example, the Estrada account.
That's correct, because again, I'm basing this on all of their bank accounts. And for example, the reason I have a different one for Bank of America is Bank of America is a credit card. It's not a bank account. So you don't combine those. You've got to separate those. Wells Fargo is a mortgage account. It's a separate account. So again, I separate that. And then I bring it back in later on because I'm looking at their expenses, for example. But no, I don't have a separate exhibit for each separate bank account because I combined them all in 272.
All right. So going back to 271, thank you. Looking at the bottom, that gray total line of the first chart, that balance of $11,752, that includes a reflection of the 401k loan that was taken out, correct?
That's correct.
There's in fact about 7,000 of that total amount left is from the Wells Fargo or from the 401k withdrawal.
That's correct. Well, it's about I think it's in $6,300. That's in the 1660-3.
And the second box here is the credit card balances, and like I just mentioned, you talk about that more extensively in some later exhibits. Several times during your testimony, you referred to the spending on this account as they, but this is not a they account. These two credit cards are Dan Brophy's credit cards, correct?
They're in his name, but there's no way for me to tell whether they both had a card and who was spending the money, or whether they were both going to FO together or getting gas in their cars. I would agree that those debts are in Mr. Brophy's name, but that doesn't, I say they because, I assume that they're both benefiting from the spending on that card.
Sure, but you don't actually know who's using that card, and your testimony is you can't tell who has cards on these accounts?
Not as I sit here today. Bank of America doesn't delineate by card, not like card name. So, for example, I have a card in my name, but my husband has a card and he can use it, but the bill comes in my name. So I say they because I'm assuming they're both benefiting from the expenditures on those cards.
All right, and but you can't say for sure that the conscientious change that you talked about several times and the conscientious decrease in spending wasn't Dan Brophy, whose account that is, choosing to spend differently on that particular account.
Correct.
But you did notice, and you've mentioned it several times, that this particular account, you notice a concerted effort after the 401k loan is taken out to decrease the spending in this account and to focus on paying the payments on that account.
I actually think it was before the 401k loan. Yeah, before the 401k loan, he's using it a lot less and paying those higher payments.
All right, so you see even before that an effort from this account to go down. And what exhibit are you referring to?
I'm at exhibit 274.
All right, and so you you notice in this particular account an effort then over time as things are, would you say, a bit problematic in the amount of cash flow that they have, that this card you notice an effort to decrease the spending on this account?
Yeah, if you go to exhibit 283, which is the graph, you can see that it's happening before the loan happens. The decrease in this Bank of America statement.
All right.
283.
And you don't see that same decrease or conscientious change in spending exhibited in the on-point account, do you?
In terms of difference in spending, well, imagine that they're taking, the faux payments or the gasoline payments, and they're now using that with cash instead of the credit card. So, and I actually see an increase in spending in 2018, and likely it's because A, they have more money, and B, they're not using the credit card. So, you actually see that they've moved they're using cash instead of credit for things like gas and going out to eat.
And to be clear, you're saying they again, but you're referring to an increase in spending in the on-point account in 2018.
No, ma'am, I'm saying all accounts, all 8.
So I was asking you specifically about the difference between the Bank of America credit card and the on-point account. You notice a concerted effort, you mentioned it several times, a conscientious change in the spending in the Bank of America credit card. Do you notice that same conscientious level of spending in the on-point account? And I think what you're saying is no, because you see it go up in 2018.
I can't, as I sit here today, I'm happy at a break to take a look at the on point specifically, because again, I wanted to look at spending across all accounts. And so, specific accounts, as I sit here today, I can't answer it. I'm happy to answer it after a break if we get one.
Okay, and so you didn't look that closely on who's using that on-point account or who has access to it, other than it's listed as a joint account.
Yep, the on-point accounts were joint, or they were the Brophy Estrada. The Wells Fargo accounts had Mr. Brophy's name on them. And the credit card, I can't remember Sears. I can't remember whose name was on Sears, but I do believe only Dan's name was on the Bank of America credit card.
And you didn't actually have the Sears statements, right?
I had one Sears statement, but it was dated September 2018.
And then looking, oops, sorry, we're on the wrong, can we go back to 271? Last question on this exhibit, and looking at that bottom line again, kind of coming back to that same point, you show a decrease here of 72%, but this isn't accounting for where that additional money comes in, correct? In other words, when you testified earlier, you're talking about an effort to suddenly change their spending and move money to pay this down. Is that accounting for the fact that they're taking out loans in order to be able to make their payments?
Most of this was paid down prior. The Sears, for example, was paid down before the 401k loan. A good portion of the Bank of America was as well. So no, I'm not in this particular exhibit showing where the payments came from. I'm only showing the balances on the debt between those two dates.
All right. Looking at States Exhibit 270, or excuse me, Defense Exhibit 273. We'll put them up here too so you can see whichever is easier for you. So a couple of questions about this. The first line here, you have ATM deposit. What does that mean? I mean, other than, obviously it means money deposited in ATM. What does that include?
That's ATM deposit or ATM check deposit. That literally comes from the face of the bank statement. That's what the bank statement said. Most of the ATM deposits appeared to be Mr. Brophy's payroll.
Are they all Mr. Brophy's payroll?
No. So, for example, the $35,000 401k loan, that we can see that 2017, that $55,000. It looks like they deposited that check via the ATM.
And so did you trace all of the deposits then to figure out exactly what they were? What was from payroll? What was from other monies coming in from somewhere else?
I did my very best. So for example, if you look at, this doesn't have my notes that say no deposit or no, where it says transfer from joint. So let me use the pointer. 16, I'm short. $16,000, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 6 lines down. If you had actually looked at those, On the bank statement, I think those also showed as just an ATM deposit, but those were actually the checks that were being written from the joint account, and they were going into Mr. Brophy's Wells Fargo account. And so I knew checks were being written out of one account, and then I could see on the same day the same exact deposit being made. So again, I did my very best to delineate the deposits that were income related from things that were being transferred, the 401k loan, et cetera.
And is that what these, a couple lines, well, what you're talking to, the two from 1660-9, is that what you're talking about? Those entries are accounting for that?
Correct. So that's a transfer. That means that one of the other accounts received money from 1660-9 or sent money to 1660-9. So that I'm delineating transfers between accounts, because again, in doing the accounting, we want to make sure those all zero out, right? A transfer, all the transfers should zero. So you're going to see an opposite number probably further down the line in this exhibit. That's an exact opposite of some of these other numbers you're seeing in the positive side.
All right. And so then same question for the second line, ATM check deposit. What does that include?
Again, those are what the bank is saying as to how the money got deposited. Sometimes they say ATM deposit. Sometimes they say only ATM check deposit. My professional guess is that the check deposit means it's only a check, or it's like my kids do. They can take a picture of their payroll check and they deposit their money. While the regular deposit may have included cash. So sometimes the bank, depending on the bank, will delineate if it's only a check versus if it's, for example, cash and check.
All right.
So
So for example, let's say a friend of mine owed me money from several years back. They pay me $20 in cash, and then they write me a check for $70. Those would show, that money that they're paying me would show up here as check deposit and ATM deposit, because one was cash and one was a check.
That's correct.
Okay. And these aren't delineated about where that money is coming from or what it is, just that these are checks that were deposited.
That's correct.
And then similar to, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down, it says deposit. What about that?
That's just what the bank said, that a deposit was made. So it's, again, we're literally taking what the bank statement says. So if I could click, if I had my Excel spreadsheet open, I could click on those numbers. It would tell me all the deposits that were related to the summary of these numbers. For example, $29.71. That's probably one deposit. It might be a few small ones. And then we could go to the bank statement, and the face of the bank statement would just say deposit. Whereas up above, it might have said ATM deposit or ATM check deposit. So it's what the bank is saying on the face of the bank statement.
Okay. And so you're just kind of summarizing in this exhibit, which we mentioned earlier, is a summary of 272, but sort of categorized.
Yep, it's sources and uses of funds from payee names.
And I think you testified to this on direct, but predominantly you used whatever name or term was on the statements, except when you were differentiating between like income or a debit or a charge from the same company.
Right, so if you look, can we scroll down just maybe a few lines? Yeah, right there at the bottom, you see Amazon income. It's probably from book sales. So the Amazon income is what I changed, because it comes in from Amazon, just like, if they bought some supplies at Amazon. So I changed that. Or the transfer from joint, those were the ones that, might have said deposit on the bank account or ATM check deposit, but I knew that was a transfer from the joint account or another account into, for example, Dan's Wells Fargo account. So again, trying to delineate.
Okay. All right. And what about if the Brophies, where in this chart do we see if the Brophies are paying for things in cash? For example, buying a gun at a gun show, lending someone some money. Where are those purchases reflected here?
So if Mr. Brophy or Ms. Brophy had any cash related income, that's not going to be here unless they deposited it. So if they deposited cash, it'll be here. But if they just put it in their pocket and used it, it won't be. And neither would be any cash payments. So if they went out to lunch or went to Starbucks and paid cash or paid cash for anything else, that's not going to show up here too. Because again, that's not running through a bank account.
Well, what about withdrawals? Like if I take money out, right?
Yep.
I take $400 out. Where are we seeing that sort of stuff here?
Yep. So let me find it for you. I sorted this by largest number to smallest number. If we go to the last page, so page 11 of Exhibit 273, please, middle of the page. Right there, stop. So we've got ATM withdrawal here. So $943 are total withdrawals in 2016, those 8 months. $1,100 total ATM withdrawals in 2017 for the whole year, and $640 in the first month. So that's where you see that.
And I assume, but I just want to clarify, those are then withdrawals you see in the statements that say like a cash ATM withdrawal, and it wouldn't reflect something like you go to Fred Meyer and you buy a pack of gum and take out $20, because that would show up under Fred Meyer.
Sometimes the banks will delineate those. I don't believe any of the Brophy's bank accounts did. So some banks will show you those cash backs, but that you're correct. So that would not show here if they took any cash back at Fred Meyer or the grocery store or whatever.
It would just show under that group. Like it looks like there's some Safeway, there's some Fred Meyer, et cetera. It would show under that.
Correct.
All right. Looking at states, or excuse me, I keep saying that. Defense Exhibit 275. And just a couple of questions on this one. And we talked about this a little bit already, but this is showing just some of the charges specific to the Bank of America credit card. Is that right?
Not some, all.
Okay, so this is the same summary we just looked at, but broken down, or same type of summary we just looked at in 273, but broken down specifically to the Bank of America.
Correct. It's the charges that ran through the Bank of America credit card.
Okay. And it looks here that one of the highest expenses, the second highest, well, really the highest charge, it appears, is an interest charge on this account of almost $3,000.
Right, $2,739. So yeah, the interest on that card.
And that's the interest that was paid, or money that was paid to take care of this balance, correct?
No, ma'am, it's the amount that Bank of America charged.
Right, but they had to pay that or will owe that.
Correct.
All right. And then looking at States Exhibit Defense Exhibit 276. And I think you sort of clarified this on direct this morning. Yesterday, you made a comment that the Brophies were regularly, consistently, every month paying their mortgage. But that's not correct, is it?
That's not what I testified to. I did say that, but I said that with regard to the Citibank card or the Citibank mortgage.
Well, I believe you're referring to the Wells Fargo mortgage, but perhaps you're referring to a specific period of time?
So yesterday I said they every day very consistently paid the Citibank mortgage because that was one where we went from one exhibit to another really quickly. And Ms. Maxfield was asking me actually questions about Citibank. But I did not testify. I would not testify to that about Wells Fargo other than the 8 months prior to Mr. Brophy's death.
Okay, so in that period, it was consistent, but prior to that, and this is what I think maybe was clarified this morning, there's quite a period of missed payments.
So yeah, there are primarily two periods of time where you, in the 2 years where you see those missed payments. And that's in the fall of 2016 and then really in the summer of 2017.
And I think you mentioned this earlier in talking about tracing some of the loan money, but in fact, when they took out that 401k loan, $8,020.62 of that loan went straight to pay their mortgage.
Hold on. I don't know if all of that is from, yeah, they drew down, it all happened at the same time, right? So I think that's a fair assessment. There's other money in the bank account at the time, but the majority of it came from that loan at that period of time.
In other words, they were 4 months behind on their mortgage until they took that loan out on their 401k.
That's correct.
And then once they took that loan out, that money has been able to help them pay their mortgage for the remainder of 2018 that you're looking at.
There's a lot of things going on at 2018. So it's not as if they take money from this 401k loan and then transfer it to pay the mortgage. That's not what's happening. So they're paying for their taxes, they're paying for the yard maintenance guy or people. So there's a lot going on. It's not a 1-for-1 where they're transferring money from the 401k loan account where they place that money to pay the mortgage.
Well, but they transfer that money, the loan, into their bank account. They immediately pay their 4-month in arrears mortgage.
In October.
Right. And then that balance they continue to have and are able to now finally pay their mortgage on time.
The problem is that, they're making more money and we've got different expenditures, right? So I just disagree with saying it's a 1-for-1 because there's too many other inputs going on and they're not tying their mortgage payment to a transfer out of the savings.
Well, but they're moving the money back and forth between savings, checking, and then writing checks from the OnPoint account to the Wells Fargo account.
They did that for 2 years. I mean, they've always done that. That money, a portion of the money from the joint account or the Brophy Estrada account would be paid over to Dan. There would be a check written to Dan Brophy, and then it would go to Mr. Brophy's bank account where Wells Fargo would sweep it out of the account. And Wells Fargo, I had a mortgage with Wells at this exact same period of time, and they required us to get a bank account with them, and they required, that money to come out of that account. So that actually made sense to me that was happening, but they're not, I can't tell you, oh yes, they're using this $35,000 loan to pay their mortgage. Because there's too much other income going on, right? There's other things going on and they're not transferring that mortgage only to transferring money only to pay the mortgage. It's not a.
So how do you imagine they were going to pay 4 months back plus an additional month? So almost $10,000 in their mortgage without taking out a loan.
I agree that loan was necessary to pay that arrears.
Because in other words, they couldn't afford their mortgage without taking out a loan.
They couldn't have afforded the arrears without taking out a loan or selling the house or finding some other, for a loan or, taking a credit card draw or whatever, right? That was necessary for that arrears.
And would you agree, and I think you just testified this morning, that your mortgage is a necessary expense?
Typically, it's one of those things that you pay the mortgage, or you're going to jeopardize your ability to keep that residence.
And just looking at these mortgage payments and looking at the income that you've looked at coming into their accounts, the Brophies couldn't afford to pay their mortgage with the income coming in and the expenses that they were expending until they took that loan out.
They could have afforded it. They chose to make other payments. For example, they accelerated the Sears and the Citibank, the Sears and the Bank of America card. So I disagree with saying they couldn't afford it. What I can say is that they used their money elsewhere.
They spent it on other things or insurances, things
Or
like
debt.
that.
Or debt. That's correct.
All right, looking at Defense Exhibit 277. This is that Citibank payment history. You did not have any statements or information on the details of this loan, correct?
I feel like I'm going to sneeze. That's correct. I did not.
And so you testified that you see this increase in payments. There's actually a couple sort of random payment changes in the fall of 2017, but then particularly you were talking about March through May of 2018.
Yeah, like
You
that.
don't know-
That's. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. You don't know why that increased, correct?
I don't have a statement. No.
So you don't know if it was because of the terms of the loan or they had to increase their payment?
Well, if it was the terms, if they had to increase it, then I would have expected it then to be a totally random number, right? If the bank's gonna require you to pay a additional amount or change your interest rate or something, you're gonna have dollars and cents. But these increased by a very even dollar amount, right? Either $250 or $500. So that's why I made that inference.
And again, sort of coming back to what we talked about near the beginning, you referred just this morning about the fact that they had this plan to repay this mortgage. And is this just an assumption you're making because they're choosing to pay back an increased payment amount?
What my professional opinion on the plan is that they had a plan to reduce debts. So, and you can see, I kind of liken it to, if you've ever heard of Dave Ramsey or Susie Orman or those folks that all, that they're money manager people, and what do they tell us? You pay down your high level consumer debt first, and then, go after your next debts next. You can literally see that in these bank accounts, right? You see Sears, and then that falls off. Then you see Bank of America, that falls off. As Bank of America and Sears falls off, they're starting to pay the Citibank mortgage. So in my professional opinion, you can see the plan literally through the bank accounts. It's not that they just had a plan for this one mortgage. It's an overall understanding of what's going on here.
All right, and looking at Defense Exhibit 278. And so you testified that you created this specifically to show income sources by year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and a lot of this is coming from Defense Exhibit 273.
100% of it is yes.
Okay, and so you've just taken the income amounts from 273 and then put them into what's essentially a smaller chart just showing income.
Correct.
All right, and so the same question here then, you have ATM deposit and ATM check deposit, and you're listing that as income, but you don't actually know if it is income.
I disagree, because if we go to the bottom of 278, to the extent possible, I'm reducing that, by what I know or what, appears to be transfers, the $35,000 loan. So to the extent that I could delineate anything that wasn't income, I delineated all deposits from total income sources.
Sure, but like we talked about in 273, you don't know if someone paid them money they owed them from 2 years ago. You don't know if they got money from some other source that just happened to come due one of those months. You don't actually know between those ATM deposits and the check deposits, like what that money specifically is.
Not on all of them, that's correct.
Okay. And then if we can go through each line, if you can scroll up. And if you can just explain it, you have not income. Some of these I think you talked about, but if you can go through each of the not incomes and explain what that is.
Okay. So the first one is transfer from joint. The first not income line is transfer from joint, 15,146.57. Do you see that?
Yes.
Hold on, because I'm hoping I can explain it so everybody understands. So that number ties almost exactly to the number of checks, the amount of checks Dan Brophy wrote, or that was written to Dan Brophy. So these are funds that are checks written from the, mostly the joint account that go into Dan Brophy's account. So it's like having money in this pocket and moving it to this pocket, right? That's not income. That's just me moving it from one account to the other. So that's why that's not income. And I traced those because I had the checks that were written and I was going through, I'm like, oh yeah, we have all these checks written to Mr. Brophy. I need to go figure out what he did with them. Did he cash them? Did they go into a bank account? And literally every single one, but for one where it looks like he took $200 cash out of that check, literally every single one on the same day the check was written to him was deposited into the Wells Fargo account. So that's what those are.
And I think you testified to this, but that would be consistent with what you described of needing to pay the mortgage from that particular account. So they're just moving money.
Yeah, they're moving money to where Wells Fargo is going to sweep it out.
Okay. And so would that be the same for the next two lines then, which is the $1,000 and then $915, that same sort of idea?
Well, the next line is to from 1660-9. So what that means is that one of the other 7 accounts received or paid money to 1660-9. So that again is a transfer of money from one bank account to another. So that's not income.
Okay, sorry. And I
That's
was
all right.
I was assuming that and jumping ahead to the
That's all right.
next two. And would that be the same for these two as well then?
Then the one, the $1,000 even. That $1,000 even, it's a check adjustment. It means a check was written and probably bounced. And so that's just the bank putting that money back into your account. And that's not income, right? That's just your money being put back into your account. And then the 2 from 1660-1, again, we've talked about the transfers. That's just money that came into the other 7 bank accounts from 1660-1. And that's, again, a net number for that year. And then beginning balance, that's just the beginning balance on the date, on all of the beginning balances we had. And that, again, not income. That was already income in a prior year.
Okay. And then the last one we have is a reverse withdrawal, which I think would be similar to that check adjustment that you talked about.
Correct.
Okay. And so then we look at these less item columns, the non-income items and the 401k loan.
Mm-hmm.
The 401k loan, I think we've talked about quite a bit. That's pretty clear. You took that out, as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. What about, where are you getting the totals from these other amounts?
Those all come from the line items we just talked about.
Okay. So where in this chart is the 2 Foresters loans that were taken out?
Foresters loans,
Yes.
not here.
Are you aware that the Brophy's took out 2 Foresters loans?
No.
Okay, so you're not aware that they took out close to $5,000 in loans from?
It was
from
5,000. That wouldn't change this very much. But if it's 5,000, no, I'm not aware. So that adjustment wasn't made in this analysis.
Okay, and you didn't see that as you're going through the accounts?
It may have been. It might have come in very similar to the income from selling the loans, or excuse me, selling the policies. So it probably just looked like a regular deposit from selling a policy.
So for example, where you have Foresters USA here near the top as income from Foresters, it'd be fair to say then that what's actually a loan amount that they have to pay back is included in income from Foresters.
If it came in straight from Foresters like that, and not, for example, as a check deposit, yeah, potentially that you'd need to reduce the $5,000 out of the quote income line item out of this.
Okay. And so going back down then to those income line items, when you have total income sources, and you've calculated then, so that in your gray line, you've calculated then what the average income would be, monthly income would be based on what time period each of these amounts are coming from. In the yellow, this total income source, you don't actually know if that is in fact regular income.
What do you mean? How do you define regular?
Well, for example, these numbers are not consistent with their tax returns.
Well, they actually are.
So
I mean, they're not going to, you can't look at taxable income and assume it's the same as deposited income. Like if you're not looking at for example, if you get a wage from Multnomah County of $100,000, I'm just throwing a number out, that's going to show on your tax return as taxable income. But I'm almost 100% certain that you don't put $100,000 into your bank account. You're going to put a number less than that into your bank account. So I can't look at your tax return and just understand your income, right? Because I have to assume if you have a wage, you're actually bringing home less money. Same goes for a Schedule C. If I own a business, my business makes X, but that's not my income, right? Because I bring all of that money in and then I have expenses. So my tax return is going to have a net number. So you have to go to for example, to Ms. Brophy's Schedule C to look at the income there. So I disagree.
So to be clear, what you're saying is you would expect the number on the tax return to be higher than the income you're calculating here.
It depends on what you're looking at. So if I'm looking at Mr. Brophy's wages, his wages on the tax return are going to be higher. Sorry. Mr. Brophy's wages is going to show more taxable income on his tax return than what comes into his bank account. And I think we all understand that because I think most of us have had a job in our life and we don't actually bring home all the money that goes on our tax return as income. But if you're looking at the first page of their tax return and you're looking at their total taxable income, they're going to flow through some of the Social Security. Some of it may or may not be taxable. Well, all of that money comes into their bank account. Not all of it's necessarily taxable. Then you're going to go to Ms. Brophy's Schedule C. It's going to show a net number on the first page of the tax return. It's going to be a lower number than the amount of money coming into their bank account. So depending on what you're looking at in terms of somebody's bank account and their tax return, some numbers are going to be higher on the tax return than what comes through on the bank account, and some numbers are going to be higher in the bank account than what's showing as taxable income on the tax return.
But you don't delineate, for example, this $105,923 in that same way. In other words, you don't know, again, if someone who owed them money in 2016 finally paid them. You don't include the fact that some of that money coming in is a loan. Like that's not represented here.
No, I just did a reasonableness test. Is this way out of whack with their tax returns? What I would expect on their tax returns versus what's coming into their bank account to make sure I wasn't missing anything. For example, in 2017, my number was high and I'm like, what am I missing? And I'm like, duh, it's a $35,000 401k loan, right? So, you know, if it's a $5,000 income from foresters, that's not going to change this number very much. The 35,000 obviously changed it pretty significantly. So no, I'm not going to have anything small from, you know, a loan from a friend or a payback from a friend. That's correct.
Okay, but then when you're dividing it down to an average monthly income, you can't say then that exact monthly income is going to be the same every month, because it could be that you're getting payments one month that are substantially more from a different year, for example. Like you didn't delineate the checks that are deposited, the ATM deposits. You've got quite a bit more money here than on their taxable income for 2017, for example. This is not a exact, clear representation of what, for example, when you use these numbers later for expected monthly income, those are complete estimates.
They're not estimates, ma'am. That's money that came into their bank account. That is money that came into their bank account that we've delineated to our extent possible, all large adjustments that could possibly be made and look at a reasonableness against their tax return, whether this number's totally out of whack or not. Their taxable income has nothing to do with the deposits that go into their bank account. They have 2 businesses, they have 2 wages, they have Social Security. There are so many inputs into that tax return that to try and say, well, their tax return or their taxable income is lower. Well, yeah, I would expect that because the inputs, that doesn't have anything to do with what's going into their bank account. And to the extent that you asked about, what, I don't believe we have any timing issues in terms of payments that should have been made years ago that were made now. A wage is a wage that, what, other than maybe at the end of the year, you're going to get paid in January for work you did in December, but we don't have any major timing differences or any issues like that. And so, yes, that's an average monthly income. It could have been lower at the beginning of 2017 and higher at the end of 2017, but that's an average over the the 12 months of that year.
And it also is including, some of this income coming in is gross. It's not yet taxed.
Correct. So that's correct. That's gross income coming into their accounts, and then later on, when I do the prospective financial or other things, I estimate the tax payment on that self-employment income, because you have to assume Mr. Brophy's, he's already taking his taxes out, and so they also pay a check to the IRS every year because they usually have some taxable income, and so I've accounted for that taxable income or expense later on in those other exhibits.
And I'm pausing only to see if
Can,
the court would like to take the morning break or not.
Well, I was going to let you ask one more question, but if you think it'll involve a lengthy answer, we can take the break now.
It may, that's just why.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we take our break now, and we'll be back on the record at 11 o'clock.
All rise.
All right, please be seated. And Ms. Herman, when you're ready to continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just two more questions for you as we were talking about Defense Exhibits 278. So sort of just to clarify, the top of this chart says income sources by year, but really this is tracking deposits.
It has all deposits, but the end result is income sources by year. Sorry, I moved this during the break.
Oh, that's okay. And are you aware how life insurance income works, and specifically that for certain insurance payments, the income you're receiving from selling those, that there's a waiting period, often as long as 9 months before that income cannot be taken away? In other words, if the person you're selling to cancels the policy, then that income just goes away.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I've heard of that concept. Yeah.
And so you'd agree that spending that money before that waiting period is up would not be financially sound, because you may then have to pay back that money?
It depends on the money, the amount. I would need to know, well, what amount is it that might be, quote, on hold to make a determination of whether or not it's financially sound.
And we can't tell that from this chart in 278.
That's correct.
All right. Looking at Defense Exhibit 284. All right, and you talked a bit about kind of net worth and what that has to do with. And so to kind of summarize, net worth does not have anything to do with monthly cash flow, spending behavior, or ability to meet monthly obligations, correct?
I would agree with the first two, or I think it was two, but not the last. It does have everything to do with your ability to meet monthly obligations. Do you have enough cash or equity to be able to do that in some way? But I would agree that it doesn't have anything to do with the amount of money coming into your home. And it can help you understand spending behavior, right? Because if I see somebody with a ton of credit card debt or, a lot of debt and no assets, then I think it really does speak to spending behavior sort of on a global, understanding how that's working on a whole.
But specifically, in order, for example, looking at this chart, to get your hands on that money, you would have to sell or liquidate all of your non-cash assets.
That's correct.
This isn't money that you have on hand.
No, the money you have on hand would be your total cash, and that's how we in accounting we list everything by liquidity, meaning what can I get my hands on in terms of cash the most quickly. That's why cash is first, and then the 401k balance, and then thereon. So yes, I would agree that an estimated net worth is a liquidation value of somebody's financial holdings.
And in this particular calculation, the vehicles estimates and household items estimates, that's your estimate of the totality of the worth of every single thing they own.
I understood I had a couple of cars and your basic home. I didn't understand that there was any special art or extravagant jewelry or any sort of, something that would raise, for example, the household items from a larger amount.
In other words, in order to get your hands on that $25,000, you would have to sell every single thing you own.
That's basically what this is saying, yeah.
And in this calculation as well, if you're looking at liabilities, this is assuming, when you mentioned that they would get $300,000 from the sale of their house, that's assuming only $1,000 in costs associated with realtor expenses, home improvement.
So typically in a net worth analysis, you don't make that as, you don't assume the cost of a sale. So, if somebody's going to sell a home, there's going to be some costs associated with that. But in a net worth analysis, you don't typically make that adjustment.
Okay, so all the things that you talked about, the money is being spent to improve the home, for example, the $16,000 spent after June 1st of 2018, or the costs associated with, you know, whatever you're going to pay your realtor, paying off all of these mortgages, et cetera, those costs rolled into what would be taken out of the sale price are not reflected in net worth.
Correct, correct. That's not what a net worth analysis does.
Okay, looking at Defense Exhibit 285. And yeah, that's fine, just for that view. All right, this is just looking at the amount of life insurance on Daniel Brophy, correct?
Correct.
And in this first box, this box is missing the life map insurance. Is that right?
Which one was that? Do you remember the balance? Because I did have a higher number at one point. It was a smaller policy, and I took,
$500?
yes, I took the $2,500 one out.
Okay. And it doesn't include the workers' comp from SAFE, correct?
Correct, because workers' comp is different typically than life insurance.
All right. And in this chart, in the Mutual of Omaha, that's not actually the correct date that the policy was activated.
Okay.
Right.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of these policies change, so there might be a policy and then they would update it. And so there's a chance that I might have the earlier version of when that policy was written versus when it updated. And I may not have updated my chart, but yeah.
Okay. But the amount you believe is.
Came from those insurance policies, and I did my best to put the dates on there.
Okay. All right. And then looking at Defense Exhibit 286, and now this version is not the version that you testified to today. Is that right?
Can you go to the bottom?
Yeah.
It should be. Oh, no, you're right. This is the one, I had to change it very slightly
And when did you make that change?
over the weekend.
And do you recall what you changed?
Yep, I changed the pumpkin patch. The pumpkin patch is actually the pumpkin patch at Sauvie Island. And when I did a search for, remember I was talking about categorizing everything. I looked at the pumpkin patch and I couldn't tell on the bank statements, there was lots of pumpkin patch charges. And I understood, most pumpkin patches we all go to in the fall, and these were happening all year long. And so when I did a Google search of pumpkin patch, there was actually a daycare called the Pumpkin Patch. And I thought, oh, they're probably helping the kid, because I had read the testimony that they were helping out the grandkids. So I asked the lawyers to ask Miss Brophy what the pumpkin patch was. They confirmed that Mr. Brophy went to the pumpkin patch to to regularly, buy items for food. And so I removed the kids and grandkids line and put that $50 back up into the food line. And then I believe I increased the amount of money that was going out for the yard work.
So fair to say you went back through and sort of kind of double checked everything and made some corrections where you saw appropriate.
Correct. And I think we have a couple of $100 difference.
All right. And so this is a prospectus that goes from June of 2018. So assuming Mr. Brophy survived, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if we scroll up a little bit more, this you testified that the mortgage amount here is assuming that the mortgage stays exactly as it was being paid, correct?
Correct. So that's $1,700 plus $550, and then I added $50.
So this assumes that whatever happens in their plan, that the mortgage is going to be the exact same amount that it's been than it was at the time of June of 2018.
Well, again, I'm assuming the accelerated payoff of the city, it's both mortgages. So I probably should have put an S on the end. So it's both the Wells Fargo plus the Citibank, and it assumes that they're going to have that accelerated payoff of the Citibank at the $500 level.
Sure, but it assumes that the same mortgage, in other words, it assumes that their rent, right, their amount they're paying for a month for their house is going to stay the same as it was in June of 2018.
For 2018, because I would expect it to, because usually when mortgages change, they change for the year for the property tax or the the insurance. So I did assume it all the way through that into that year.
And this also does not reflect the reality, which is that in August and July of 2018, $16,000 was spent on landscaping, not just $1,000.
Again, remember, I'm assuming Mr. Brophy lived. So I would imagine that decisions changed dramatically after June of 2018. So I'm assuming a more, that they're just moving through on their plan at the same levels they were. So again, that's kind of a difficult one because he under this, he's alive, but under the actual, different expenses and different plans had to be made.
In other words, this doesn't account for a decision to move and having to complete that $16,000 of yard work in order to sell the house.
Correct.
Or an additional $5,000 that may be needed to pay to other people who are helping with the house.
Correct.
You mentioned in your testimony yesterday that the purpose or the reason, the advisable reasons why someone would withdraw from their 401k is for home improvements or to pay high interest debt, correct?
I recall that being the two main ones, yes.
Would it be included to be wouldn't be included to be reasonable to use that money to then go on vacation?
Oh, I've seen people take major vacations with their 401k, absolutely.
And it wouldn't be reasonable to then spend $1,500 on guns?
Everybody's financial decisions in terms of reasonableness are different. So that's not a huge expense.
Taking out money from your 401k to pay your mortgage is not a reasonable use of that retirement savings.
If you want to save your house, that would make sense to me.
Paying back the IRS isn't reasonable with the use of your 401k money.
Again, paying taxes would be something that I've seen people do with their 401k money.
And what about continuing to spend close to $1,000 a year at Starbucks?
$1,000 a year at Starbucks? I'm not sure that they were actually doing that.
Would that be reasonable use of 401k, withdrawing on your retirement savings?
To spend the money at Starbucks? I wouldn't advise that, no.
And in that same discussion yesterday, you talked a little bit about credit cards and where you take money from and what to pay down. Do you know what the interest was on the credit cards?
Gosh, I don't recall. I could look it up, but as I sit here today, I don't recall.
And to be fair, I guess you would only have access to that information for one statement from Sears, but then from the Bank of America you would.
Correct.
And let me just check my notes here. And what about, do you know what the interest was on the 401k loan?
It's in the promissory note, but as I sit here today, I can't tell you what that amount is.
Just 1 second. Thank you, that's all the questions I have.
You're welcome, thank you.
All right, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. We had some talk about your use of the pronoun they. Can you explain to the jury why you might use a pronoun like they when we're talking about a married couple?
That's pretty typical with married couples. It's usually a they. They're benefiting from or spending the money together. You're living together. It's a unit.
Let's look at Exhibit 275 for just a minute.
7.5. Okay.
Scroll down, well, let's start at the liquor store. Are you assuming that only Mr. Brophy drank liquor?
No, I'm not.
The Sandy Cove Inn, are you assuming that Mr. Brophy went for a romantic vacation by himself?
I would assume that they may have potentially both benefited from that.
Things like restaurants, are you assuming that they might eat dinner together?
Typically, I would expect them to, and I could see that the price is paid for pho or, the different restaurants, they were a typical two people going out to eat for dinner.
So if they go to places like Trader Joe's or the Pumpkin Patch for groceries, you would assume that both people within that married entity benefit from that?
Correct.
How helpful is it to well, let me just add, not just helpful, how honest is a financial assessment of a married couple that treats each member of that couple just as an individual or a person in a financial silo?
And unless they're truly living their life in that silo, you would never do that. You would never do that. You have to assume that marital estate, so to speak. They're both contributing money. They're both using the money. They're both benefiting from their efforts and from those expenditures.
So for example, counsel talked to you about the fact that the on-point account, even though it was a joint account, was one that Ms. Brophy used predominantly, and that the Wells Fargo account was in Mr. Brophy's name. But can you see in your analysis, for example, the money moving from the on-point account into the Wells Fargo account and then to the Wells Fargo mortgage? Is that right?
I can see that, and sometimes Dan writes those checks to himself.
But can we assume that as that money moves, that both Dan Brophy and Nancy Brophy have benefited from the payment of the mortgage?
They would have, yes.
I want to talk for a minute about these foresters loans that counsel talked to you about. The information that you have, the bank statements go back to what day in 2016, do you remember?
May 31st.
Okay. Let's assume that do you know anything about, I'm backing up. I'm
Okay.
backing up.
Okay.
Do you know anything about the forester's insurance policy?
It is my understanding that you can pay, there's a drawdown ability or a cash advance ability, so to speak.
So there are some insurance policies that you can use kind of like a savings account. You can put extra money into that and then draw money out, sometimes tax-free. Is that right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. But let's just look, let's assume that there was a $3,500 loan. In other words, that someone took something out of that forester's policy
Okay.
in June of 2016. That would supposedly inflate the income from 2016. Is that right?
Correct. So if there's, well, and if it's, I'm just trying to think in my mind whether that would actually be income, but potentially the $3,500 would have inflated the income number I have for that year. So whatever that is divided by 8.
But that's not going to change anything in 2018, is it?
It will not.
Okay. And if the Brophies took a loan or withdrew money from the forester's account on 5/22/17 for $1,450, where would you see, what income would potentially be skewed there? Would it be 2017?
Yeah, the 2017 number, if they took a $1,400 loan that I didn't account for, then I've basically got $110 extra income per month if I didn't account for that $1,400 loan.
But again, both of these loans were taken out prior to the time that the Brophies got the 401k loan, brought everything current, and then your analysis going forward to Dan Brophy's death in 2018, is that right?
Correct. So the $1,400 loan in 2017 only impacts that figure that I calculated in 2017. It doesn't impact the figure I calculated in 2018 for their income.
Okay. And it wouldn't change your analysis of their financial health on the day that Dan Brophy died?
It would not. It's not significant enough to change my analysis at all.
Council asked you about taxes and suggested that money from a 401k had been used to pay taxes in 2017. Did you see that?
No, not particularly. I believe their taxes were paid in April. They paid on time. So the taxes were paid prior to that.
Okay, so did you ever see a time that they were behind on their federal income taxes?
No, it appeared that they were paying, they usually had about $2,000 a year that they had to pay, write a check for, and they were writing that right at the time their tax returns were being prepared.
So even when they were having their crummiest years in 2016 and 2017, they were still paying the tax man on time?
Correct.
No. You and I'm trying to remember which exhibit it was that we were gonna talk about council asked you about it. I think it was exhibit 278. And she wanted to talk to you about income versus taxable income and.
Yep.
So which is the best place to start, 278 or with the tax returns?
Let's start with 278,
Okay.
the bottom of 278. So I've calculated for 2017, I know we don't have the top. I have $105,923 of income to the Brophies in 2017.
Okay, and then you talked about trying to compare the numbers that you came up with to the tax returns to see whether you were a wackadoodle or whether you were somewhere in the zone of
Correct.
reality.
A reasonableness test.
Okay, so
Correct.
let's do that.
I might call it a wackadoodle test from now on. So are we going to look at the 2017 tax return?
You have a number.
I don't have that.
Hang on, I'm not sure we have that queued up as an exhibit. Do you have it in front of you?
We do.
I have it in front of me.
Yeah, we do.
Oh.
Okay.
She says we do, so let's find out.
I should have it. I can tell you guys what page. It's a pretty large document, so I can. We actually need to start with page 16 if it's the same 71-page document.
And we're going to start with page what again?
Well, if you have the same, we want page 1 of the tax return,
Okay.
but on my file, it's page 16 of the document.
All right.
There we go.
So what do we need to see?
Okay, can we scroll down to just the middle of this page, line 21 of the tax return? This is their 1040, page 1. I think we're all fairly, right there, stop. So we're all pretty familiar with a tax return. And so State's Council was asking me, about their taxable income not matching the income I had. I have $105,000 of income, and as we can see, the Brophies had $89,000 of total income on their tax return. So it actually makes my number look higher. And what's not understood here is that there are multiple places in this tax return we have to look. So if we can scroll back up to line 1 of this tax return, or line 7, sorry, $62,000. We have $62,000 of Mr. Brophy's income from wages. So we should, I don't have a pen. So 62,000, I'm going to put that in my calculator. We know he doesn't bring all of that home, but for now, I'm going to put that in my calculator. That's income. I'm going to skip line 12. Line 12 is Schedule C, taxable income from businesses. That's taxable income. That's not deposited income. So we're going to ignore that number. We have $39 of some miscellaneous stuff, so I'll add that 39. If we look at line 20, we have Social Security benefits. I know that this is from Ms. Brophy, And that she's got an amount of $14,232, of which $12,097 is taxable. If I go to Exhibit 278, and we don't have to toggle, I'll just read it. The Social Security income I have is $12,720. So I'm a little higher than the taxable income because that's what got deposited into her bank account. So I'm going to actually add my $12,970 because that's real money that came into the bank account. All right, so now we need to actually leave this page and we need to go to this first Schedule C. The Brophies have multiple Schedule Cs. So
Page is that on?
try 3 or 4 pages down from the file you're in.
There's a
Oh, wait,
Schedule
stop
C.
there. Stop there. There's a Schedule C. So Schedule C is how somebody who is self-employed typically reports their income, their business-related income to the IRS. And so as we can see, if we can kind of look at the Schedule C as a whole, you can see $3,200 of income, and then Mr. Brophy has various expenditures. Well, the $3,200 of income at the top of Schedule C is what I want to compare to the deposits to the bank, because that's what they're saying is the gross income for this business. So I expect the gross income from the business, from the Schedule C, to relatively be close to the deposits to the bank account. So I'm adding $3,200 to my number. If we could keep scrolling, Ms. Brophy has at least 1, maybe 2 Schedule Cs. So this goes, so what's going to happen on the tax return is they're going to take that gross income, reduce all the expenses, and that net smaller number is going to go to the front page. Yep, keep going. So here's, if we stop here, we have Ms. Brophy's income from her insurance sales. So I'm going to add, I lost it, add $30,904 to my number. So there's that. And then she's got expenses. So that lower number goes to her, to the front page of the tax return. And if you keep going, just want to make sure, I can't remember if she has one for her book sales. No. Okay. So when I add all of those numbers together, I get about $111,000 of income, right? But if you looked at the first page of the tax return, it's only $89,000. So this is my number's 105. My number for the Brophies of their deposited income for 2017 is $105,000. So we can see that deposits to your bank account are not going to match your taxable net income. And the reason is because we have all these different inputs. And so that's what I did to do my reasonableness test, is I wanted to say, okay, I have I actually had $140,000 of deposits for 2017. And I did exactly what I just showed you. I went to their tax return. I'm like, okay, here's his wages. Here's the Social Security. Here's the income from this and that. And then I went, why do I only have like 110 and my number or on the tax return as expected income, but I had more deposits. And then I realized I had missed the $35,000 401k. Once I reduce that, guess what happens? I'm now actually lower or within line of where the tax return tells me their income should be, which indicates that my analysis on Exhibit 278 is reasonable and aligns with their tax return.
I'm looking at all my scribbles. Hang on one sec. Council asked you whether you had been provided, what you had read in preparation of your testimony and in preparation of the charts that you prepared for the jury.
Mhm.
Had you
Yes.
also been provided a copy of the opening statements in this case?
Yes, I actually watched those. I can't remember if I got a transcript, but I watched them.
Okay. And you watched the claims that were made by either party concerning the financial health of the Brophies?
I did.
is the actual financial picture after your expert assessment, does it bear any resemblance whatsoever to the claims made by the state in their opening statement?
It's not close.
I have no further questions, thank you.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and for the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Couch, you're excused.
Thank you.
What I want to do for the jury is this. We do have a legal matter to take up. I think I'm going to just send you to lunch early, but we'll plan on being back on the record at 1:30. And then I'm going to want to talk to the attorneys after they step out.
We're not gonna do that?
All rise for the jury.
All right, for the attorneys, what I think I want to do, unless either one of you tells me this is unworkable, the next witness is the one we were going to have the 104 hearing on. My thought would be just have the attorneys back at 1 o'clock and take up the 104 hearing at that point rather than do it right now. Is that an issue? If it is, we can do it now.
But it's not an issue, Your Honor. We actually are planning to call Richard Freimark next because he's been waiting so long and he's trying to get out of town. But Dr. Robinson would be right after Mr. Freimark. So
Oh,
do the 104, then do Mr. Freimark, and then do Dr. Robinson.
well, in that case, to save some time, why don't we do the 104 hearing now? I have to wait for my clerk to return to swear in.
But either option is fine, Your Honor. I wasn't.
Well,
requesting
it
that
would be
you change the
wasting a
time.
half hour. As I look at the defense witnesses list, it looks like we're way behind. So, one of the other things I'm going to be asking, because you know more than I how long certain witnesses will take. I've already told the jury we can't use this Friday, but that we can use other Fridays. Does it appear to defense that we're going to need to do that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Our thought, Your Honor, is that the 13th is a day that we could take some of the legal issues up with respect to this witness that the state wishes to call in rebuttal. We do have a number of witnesses that will be very short, and we're hoping that we could start catching up
Okay.
as we go through the week. I could certainly see that we would be in session on the 20th, which is, of course, a Friday as well, but we're hoping not to have to do witnesses on the 13th so that we can carve out some time to address these other very important issues.
Okay. Then why don't we bring in Mr. Rubinson? We're going to do the 104 hearing for Mr. Rubinson.
Dr. Rubinson's back there.
Oh, okay. All right, so Dr. Rubinson, we'll just have you come and stand in the witness box as close to the microphone as you can get, and my clerk will swear you in.
I'll have you raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll please just ask you to state and spell your first and last name.
Okay, Daniel Rubinson, Daniel Rubinson.
And before you begin questioning defense, just as a reminder, this is sort of limited testimony to the issue that's been raised. I do have, although I don't know if it's admitted, but I do have Defendant's Exhibit 331, which lays out his background and training. So with that in mind, go ahead and.
Right, with the court's permission, I'll just skip all of those questions then. Dr. Rubinson.
I guess before you do, let me ask, I want to make sure. So with regards to 331, which I can't remember if it's been admitted, but.
It has not, but we can offer it at this time.
Okay, I guess to try to streamline this, I'm just asking the state, do they, as I understand the source of their potential objection, it does not relate to his training and experience?
Correct.
All right, okay. Then go ahead, Ms. Weinmiller.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Rubinson, did our firm ask you to perform an analysis of economic loss in this case? Yes. How do you analyze economic loss?
This is something I've done for many years in civil matters, and following the law, economic loss in a situation like this is based on the pecuniary loss to the estate, support of survivors, as well as the loss of household services.
Right. When you say pecuniary loss, you're talking about just the monetary, just the economic loss, are you not?
That's correct.
You're not taking into account any of the intangibles, the affection, the partnership, any of those kinds of things. You're just talking about the monetary loss to the person.
That's correct.
And can you tell us briefly what would go into direct financial support, the economic part?
Sure. It's basically based on the income that a person brings into the household minus what's called personal consumption or the spending that is directed specifically to them.
And then there's a second component that you mentioned, loss of household services.
Yes.
In general terms, I'm going to ask you to be more specific about your analysis in this particular case, but in general terms, what does that encompass?
When a person is deceased or incapacitated and no longer able to contribute to the household chores, that'd be cooking, cleaning, shopping, all the things that go on in a household. And then other members of the household or other individuals would have to step in to make up that gap.
And potentially that's not only does the individual's time have value, but that may actually be an expenditure that people have to be hired to fill some of those gaps.
That's correct. Yeah.
So can you give us just a general sense before you apply it to this particular situation? What assumptions go into that type of analysis?
For the whole thing or just
Right,
the
well,
services?
let's take the two parts separately. Let's start.
Sure. For the pecuniary loss, I'm looking at records of income. I'm looking at the composition of the household. That is how many people are in the household and total household income, because that tells me how much of a fraction I have to reduce for the decedent's personal consumption spending.
Okay, and what assumptions go into the loss of household services?
For that, I, along with most forensic economists, use a government data source, the American Time Use Survey, which has detailed data on the amount of time that individuals spend on household services. And so I'm looking at tables that show that amount of time for a person who would be demographically similar to Mr. Brophy, that is employed or in later years retired and living with just one other person with a spouse.
Okay, so in this particular analysis, can you put those factors into play and explain how many years you were presuming Mr. Brophy would continue to earn income, and whether there were any factors about him in particular that would change that application of the government data, sort of the demographic wide number that you were applying?
Sure. At the time of his death, Mr. Brophy was almost 64 years old. The information provided to me indicated that he had planned to work until age 70 so he could max out Social Security. The normal work-life expectancy for someone like him would have been to age 69 or age 70, so pretty much the same thing.
Okay, and what income figure did you use in reaching your determination?
I used as a baseline the last year I had, which was 2017. And let me look up what the number is. And that was for him $66,165.
So for the first of those two factors, the pecuniary loss from his income, what total number did you get?
The total pecuniary loss of pecuniary
Yes,
support,
yes.
$402,041.
Okay, and again, that's attributable to a loss of income that he was bringing into the house, actual cash deposits, money that he was bringing into the household.
It's not, I don't think of it as cash income, but it's the loss of support, and so it's looking at his income minus spending that would be attributed to him only, what's called personal consumption.
Okay, and what was the factor, what was the fraction that you applied there?
It was about 20%. It varied a little bit from year to year because it's based on total household income that I've projected.
All right, and then with respect to that second prong, what was your assessment? First of all, what do you think the loss of services came to? And then second, how did you reach that number?
Sure. You mean the total for loss of services?
Yes.
$730,992.
And what period of time does that cover?
So that covers from the time of his death to a couple of years before his life expectancy, so about to age 81.
And you say a couple of years before his life expectancy. Why would you stop before his life expectancy?
Because typically when people are near the end of their life expectancy, their capacity to provide services diminishes. And so it's standard to look at a full function or healthy life expectancy, which is a little less than total life expectancy.
Okay, and so the number for him would be, you would think that by age 81, perhaps he would start providing less in terms of household services. We can't assume that he would still be able to provide household services.
That's correct, yes.
Are there circumstances that could have increased those numbers?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
You're making some assumptions here, and I'm wondering whether your assumptions are aggressive assumptions or conservative assumptions, and if so, why?
Okay, so with respect to the pecuniary loss, I just looked at his earnings from his two sort of W-2 jobs with the Culinary Institute and Avamere. He also had an independent business, Odonata, I think it was. My understanding is that he planned after retirement to put more time into that, and so in principle, his earnings on that from that business could have increased. I didn't include any income from that at all.
So the income that you looked to were both the Culinary Institute income
And Avamere,
and Avamere, and you were basing that on actual performance in 2017.
that's correct, yeah. Yeah, off the tax returns.
Okay, and then, as you've said, you were assuming that somewhere right around the age of 70 or going into the age of 70 would be the time that he would stop bringing that income into the household.
That's correct. So I had no additional income past that point.
Okay. And with respect to the second prong, the loss of household services, again, you're making assumptions based on the government data about people like him in his demographic.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah.
If he were somebody who contributed at an unusually high level to his household, let's say he's a master chef and he loves to garden and he actually likes to do the laundry.
Yes.
So he's a man who is doing all of those things on a regular basis and is in reasonably good health. Would that then, the figure that you use based on his demographic and other men like him, would that figure be a conservative figure?
Yes, it would. Yeah. Again, that's based on an average for all men who were in a similar situation.
Okay. All right. I have no further questions.
Any questions in aid of potential objection?
Yes, just a couple. I guess I just want to clarify how you got to like what calculations you're doing to get to these numbers. So for loss of pecuniary support, that number $402,041 appears to be about 6 years making $66,000 a year.
In a rough sense, I'm also allowing for inflation, wage inflation, and I'm also discounting to present value. And I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that concept or not. That's a standard adjustment that's made in forensic economics because dollars received in the future are worth less than dollars received today. So I have to reduce things to do that present value calculation.
Okay, sure. I guess where my confusion is, the math is roughly $66,000 times it's 6.09 is $402,000. So where does the reduction in his spending come in? Maybe I just misunderstood what you were saying.
It's already baked into that figure of 402,000, roughly 402,000.
In what capacity?
Yeah, I do not understand your question.
So, like, what math did you do specifically to get to 402,000? Maybe that'll be
Got it.
easier.
Okay, so I'm looking at his earnings year by year. I'm making an allowance for inflation because earnings typically grow a little bit over time. I'm getting a number that's growing. I'm taking those future dollar amounts, I'm reducing those to present value. And then for each year, I'm making an adjustment that's around 20% for his personal consumption spending.
So, how long does this cover? How many years?
Let's see. So let's see, he was almost 64 years of age at death. I have him working to age 70. So if I'm doing the math correctly, that's about 6 years.
Okay. And then I guess the same question for household services. Can you explain the math that you used?
It's really the same. Again, I'm looking at the number of hours per week based on those government data. I'm applying a wage rate to those services, allowing for inflation, running over the healthy life expectancy, so about to age 81, and then reducing to present value. There's no reduction for personal consumption because we're not talking about income here, we're talking about services.
And so, what number are you using?
What number am I using for what?
So so you're using a number, like you use $66,000 of income to calculate pecuniary loss.
Yeah.
What number are you using for household services?
Okay, so it's different for the period when he's working and when he's not working because people tend to spend more time on services after they're retired. And so in the years when he's working, it's about $25,000, almost $26,000 a year is the value of those lost services. In the years when he's retired, it's about $36,000 a year. And that's in today's dollars. Okay, so not allowing for inflation and all that other stuff.
And so you're assuming then that once someone retires, they're going to be contributing more to the household because they're not at work.
In terms of services,
Right.
it's not that I'm assuming that. That's what the data show based on the actual behavior of people in the US.
And that's looking at that American Time Use survey?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the standard source used by economists who do this kind of work.
And just like the average person would obviously clean more if they're home more, or cook more perhaps if they're home more, that sort of analysis. Is that what's going into that?
Yes, and again, that's not an assumption. This is based on the behavior of actual people. They actually use a time diary that a sample of people in the country keep, where they keep track of all their time over a period of time, and then the analysis or the data are based on that.
Okay, and so it doesn't take into account, for example, if the Brophies in particular already had someone cleaning their house, were already spending, certain amounts on food. I mean, it's not specific to their circumstances.
It is not specific to their circumstances. It's an average for a demographically similar male.
And I guess that is a male who is going to, I know it's not your assumption, but the assumption being be able to work, in good health, able to work to a certain point, once retired, able to contribute because of.
So that's not exactly accurate because, again, these data include a huge sample of people. And so included in that sample are men who are in very good health and men who were in very poor health. And so this is an average that includes that full range of individuals.
Okay, so it includes a lot of different circumstances that could occur, and then they just average it out to give you sort of that baseline.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess to kind of follow up on that point, with that $730,000 number of loss of household services, there's a lot of variables in that estimation. Correct? Like it's really going to depend on the circumstances of the particular person and family that you're talking about.
This is based on the time, hours per week is, again, it's based on an average for people who are similar. And so someone who spends more time in food preparation than the average man of that age, the number of hours would be greater.
And okay, and so it's same with like chores around the household or things that let's say someone downsizes and no longer has a bunch of yard work or doesn't have responsibilities, that those things change. It may depend then on what your particular circumstances look like, because this is an average.
This is an average, that's right. So it includes people who live in their own home and take care of the yard, and it includes people who don't live in their own home, who live in a condo or something like that and don't have any yard maintenance.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Does the state have an objection as to the testimony of Dr. Rubinson?
Yes, Your Honor, just a second.
Sorry, Judge.
I think, Your Honor, that our objection more lies not with Dr. Rubinson's testimony so much as the exhibit. I think Dr. Rubinson's testimony is testifying, this exhibit is making it sound like this is the amount of money that Nancy Brophy stood to lose. And I think that the testimony as we hear it it's a calculation, it's an estimate based on the average of American men, that it is not specific enough, and he can't testify to specifics enough related to exactly what will occur for Mr. Brophy specifically.
All right, and we're talking about, just to be clear on the record, we're talking about Defendant's Exhibit 269?
Yes.
All right, defense, do you want to respond?
Your Honor, what I take from his testimony and what I've taken from conversations with him is that 269 underrepresents her likely loss, both because Mr. Brophy is the sort of person who might well have continued to bring some income into the household after he turned 70 and started collecting Social Security, unlike most men or most individuals of that age. I didn't mean that to be gender specific. And with respect to the loss of household services, again, he was really an extraordinary person with an extraordinary skill set. He was still at the age of almost 64 working at a physically demanding job that had him on his feet in a hot kitchen, and he loved that work. There's no reason to believe that he was less healthy than somebody in his demographic group. And so I think that the way Dr. Rubinson has approached this is very responsible. It is very conservative. Certainly we would tell the jury, as he has done already here, he would tell the jury that this is based on data, demographic data and averages. If one were to consult some sort of advisor about what to expect and what should need to be covered, what kinds of things to look at and think about in planning for retirement and planning for the potential losses that can occur to us as we age, that these are the kinds of figures that you would hear, and there's no reason to believe that the loss to her would be substantially under what he's described. So I think it's the best he can do. We did, Mr.
All
Brophy
right,
did.
and I don't mean to cut you off, Ms. Wendell,
Sure,
but I
that's
do want to
fine.
make sure everyone has time. With regard to Dr. Rubinson's testimony, there's no objection to what he's testified to, and therefore he can testify in similar fashion to the jury. With regard to the exhibit, I'm going to require the defense to add the word estimated. I understand the defense argument and the state's argument, but I think given the testimony I've heard, that's essentially what it is. I am worried about some confusion with the jury when they read black on white numbers without an indication that it is an estimate, or, you know, it may be an estimate that's low. That's fine, and he can testify to that, but I will require addition of the word estimated economic losses, something to that effect.
All right.
And with that, we'll be in recess till 1:30.
Okay, Judge, we'll go off the record. All rise. And then for the individuals that are watching on WebEx, we are going to have to disconnect the WebEx briefly during lunch, so you will need to log back on later this afternoon. Yeah.